Welcome back, everyone. I'm your host, James Marcuzzo. It is week 8 of the KSS, and we're going to talk about the Thomas Franck article, or Human Rights Universal. So, great article to work with because the stuff that he discusses fits with a lot of previous material. Adler, MLK, Sawhill, and so that's awesome. But then also it fits very nicely with the current material, right, of week 8, the UN, the US, and the French Bill of Rights, the documents on rights. And in his article, this article, he specifically references the UN document on rights. So a lot of nice synergies going on here. So at the outset, he is a big proponent of human rights, and he believes they should be spread and even enforced. We'll talk about it at the end. He starts off with some nefarious stoning of women in Iran or Afghanistan, in a stadium full of people. And so he's setting the stage that there are places in the world where people suffer greatly and don't have rights to protect them. He challenges at the outset dictators, tyrants, and those that go against or challenge the efficacy or the value of a human rights canon. And he doesn't trust them because, and I think he's probably right about this, they don't want human rights in their culture, in their society, because it will simply destabilize their power. And I think that's, like I said, I think that's probably true. So if you're a dictator, the last thing you want is legal protections, free speech, freedom of religion, all that stuff. You don't want that in your society. That's going to minimize, that's going to mitigate your power, your claim to power. So that seems pretty obvious. But there are also modern academics that probably fit into, critical theory realms or postmodern realms. Those are obviously connected. And they say, the Western canon of human rights is colonialism 2.0, cultural imperialism, but also Adino Adis from Tulane University, I think the first academic mention on about page 5 of the article, says something like, there's no such thing as abstract human rights, right? You have rights based on a culture and a time and a place. And that seems like a very practical approach to things, but it also is, terribly sad and would leave many people suffering greatly. And it would have given the majority of the world no ability to throw off the shackles of tyranny and make some greater claim about, I am a human, I am alive, I'm a sentient being with thoughts and feelings and emotions, and I ought to be able to try to make myself less miserable. And you shouldn't be able to stand in my way of doing that. That's kind of what our country is essentially based on, even for all of our mistakes in the past and even currently. That's the central claim. And so Adino Adis, right, he says, we hold these truths to be self-evident, all men are created equal, that they're endowed by their creator with certain unalienable rights. He says no to that. He doesn't believe that. I think it's a total fiction, and it's just not defensible. And if he's right, that's really not good. So that's an interesting topic as far as the tyrants and the bad guys that don't want human rights, but then the more academic-minded philosophers that also have an issue with human rights being one that it's imposition by Western powers on other cultures, and also that it simply is just an untenable position to hold. Now, he also, Franck, offers other leaders of the world, other cultures, outside of the West that say, no, there is no reason why human rights can't be implemented anywhere and everywhere if the leaders actually have a genuine concern for the well-being of their people. And if they do, then they shouldn't want to keep these rights and protections away from them. And so, so contend with that as you will. He did make an interesting claim that I think he is off base on. He says something to the effect of, well, there's nothing special about the West for human rights coming out of the West as opposed to somewhere else. And I think he's wrong about that. I think he mitigates in strange ways that makes it seem like he's got some lingering guilt or he's apologizing for something, and I don't ascribe to that. The West is unique in the way that other cultures are unique. And for example, in the West, historically, we're talking thousands of years historically, we have had a philosophy that's focused on the individual. Rome, Greece, long ways back, even elements while Islam was taking care of knowledge and information while Europe was in its stupid phase for about 1,000 years. And so there is an element of the value of the individual being a part of the Western philosophy. Asia, for example, has a different take on that. They developed out of a more of a Confucian perspective, which spread to much of Asia, and so they have a much more communal perspective. The difference being the individual is possibly more important than the group, and over here the group is more important than the individual. Mistakes will be made if you go to either extreme, and the preference is probably that somewhere in the middle you value the individual and you respect the individual autonomy, but not so much that you harm the group. There's, I don't know exactly what the balance is. I'm just pontificating here. But to say that there's nothing unique about the West, that it produced this canon of human rights, it's just historically inaccurate. So take that for what you will. Then he goes on to, and there's much more to be said, of course, but this would be a much longer video if I covered all of it. Then at the end, he says, and human rights are good, and we should spread them with any means necessary. And any means necessary to me sounds like violence might be, part of that equation, which on one level, I'm sympathetic to that perspective because I do know there are places in the world where people suffer greatly under tyranny and oppression. And so I could see why you would want to, ensure that they have protections for themselves against the government and the ability to grow and to prosper. But doing so without that culture embracing those values is useless. And we, I think, can use some examples of our forays into the Middle East and Afghanistan over the past 20 years. However well-intentioned some of those actions might have been, the idea of saying, you're a democracy now, you're a democratic republic, you're a representative, if their values don't comport with those systems of government, it's not going to work. And so I'm hesitant to say that we spread those rules no matter what. Enjoy the article and consider how it relates to the other previous articles in the class, and of course how it directly relates to the documents of the current week, as it's really useful for the primary assignment. And don't forget to go read that or watch that extra credit video. Best of luck.